back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode. It's pretty hard to miss all the news coming out of Columbia University recently, right?
Yeah, for sure.
There's intense student protests. The university administration is doing some pretty extreme stuff, and even like the government is getting involved.
Yeah.
It feels like something big is going on, and that's what we are gonna dig into today. With a really interesting analysis that tries to figure out why this is happening.
Exactly.
So, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
So today we're diving into the events happening at Columbia University.
Yep.
The protests, the administration's response, even the government's reaction.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it really is.
And what might seem like separate events, like the detention of that recent grad.
Right, who was organizing the protest.
Yeah, and then there's the whole visa thing with that student.
Right, the revoked visa.
And then a former student even got arrested.
It's wild.
The source we're looking at argues that these things are all connected.
Okay, so like a bigger picture.
Exactly. We're going to explore this idea that what's happening isn't just about concerns of anti-Semitism on campus.
Okay, interesting.
But about something much bigger, like a coordinated effort to kind of reshape higher education in America.
Wow. Okay, so let's get into that core argument, because the piece we're looking at doesn't mess around. It pretty much says what's happening at Columbia, and maybe other universities too,
Right?
is a deliberate push for ideological control.
That's the main point.
So they're saying this is all part of a plan.
Yep.
To control what's being taught and thought at universities.
Exactly. The source even suggests that all the stuff Trump's administration is doing.
Like what specifically?
Well, canceling those huge federal grants and contracts for Columbia.
Right.
And then demanding what they're calling academic receivership over specific departments.
Yeah, I remember that.
The source argues that those moves aren't just isolated reactions to what's happening on campus.
But part of a larger strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aimed at making conservative nationalism the dominant ideology in academia.
Whoa. That's a strong statement.
It is. And the source points to things Trump has said publicly, like, I'm quoting here, reclaim our once great educational institutions from the radical left and Marxist maniacs.
So he wants to take back the universities from the left.
That's what it sounds like, right?
Yeah. So targeting pro-Palestinian activism is just the beginning.
That's what the piece is saying. It's like a starting point, like the first step.
To do what?
Well, the source argues that by cracking down on these protests and the people leading them, it sets the stage to challenge academic freedom more broadly.
So it's about more than just these protests.
Exactly. The source suggests is part of a bigger plan to control what can be said and taught at universities.
And a huge part of this whole thing is these accusations of anti-Semitism.
Right.
The article even says these accusations are being weaponized.
Yeah, that's pretty strong language.
So what exactly do they mean by that?
Well, the source traces this back to the push for universities to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism.
The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, right?
That's the one.
I remember there was some controversy around that.
Yeah, it's a complex issue. I mean, it's meant to define anti-Semitism, but some of the examples in the definition, especially those about criticizing Israel,
Got it.
those have become really controversial. Some people say they stifle legitimate criticism.
So this definition was initially meant for law enforcement and research.
Right, but then it started to get used in different ways on campuses.
Especially, the article argues, as public opinion on Israel began to shift.
Especially among younger Americans.
Right. And then this IHRA definition starts getting used less about actual anti-Semitism, the source argues.
And more as a way to silence people who are critical of Israel.
To discredit them, attack them, even get them in trouble with the law.
Exactly. And the source argues this trend really took off after the October 7th attacks.
Oh, wow.
Like professors getting fired or suspended,
Wow.
student groups getting banned, speakers getting disinvited from events, and like we saw at Columbia, even arrests and deportations.
And the article makes a really important point that this isn't just about silencing pro-Palestinian voices.
Right.
It even impacts progressive Jewish communities and academics who are critical of Israel.
That's a really important nuance. They even use the example of Maura Finkelstein, a Jewish professor who was fired for supporting Palestinian liberation.
Wow.
And she said something really powerful. She said, if I could be fired for criticizing a foreign government, calling attention to a genocide, and using my academic expertise as an anthropologist to highlight how power operates, then no one is safe.
Wow, that's a really strong statement.
It is, and it really highlights the broader implications for academic freedom for everyone.
And the source also brings in the perspective of some scholars from the University of Haifa, Itamar Mann, and Lehi Yonah.
Right.
They warn that frameworks like the IHRA definition are being used to, in their words, discipline Jewish identity and to marginalize anti-Zionist Jewish voices.
So basically, it's not just about silencing pro-Palestinian voices, but also controlling what kinds of Jewish voices are allowed.
Exactly. And the article is arguing that all this isn't really about protecting Jewish people from hatred.
Right.
It's about pushing a political agenda and censoring certain perspectives in higher education.
It's a powerful argument. They're saying it's about power and control more than anything else.
So it sounds like a very politically motivated situation.
That's what the source is suggesting, yes.
Yeah.
But they also point out that it's not just a one-sided issue.
What do you mean?
Well, they highlight instances where Democrats have also supported some of these measures or framed things in similar terms.
Oh, interesting.
Like they mentioned Senator John Fetterman, Representatives Josh Gottheimer and Richie Torres, even Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
So even though they might call for things to calm down or for someone to be released,
Right.
they still often frame the protests as anti-Semitic.
That's what the source points out.
Yeah.
And they even suggest some reasons why some Democrats might be going along with this.
Like what?
Well, things like worries about losing money from big donors.
Okay, that makes sense.
Also the influence of powerful interest groups.
Right.
And even maybe wanting to control what the next generation of activists coming out of these universities will believe.
So keep those young people in line.
That's one way to put it.
Wow. That's a pretty critical take on things.
It is. The source is basically saying that some people in power, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, see suppressing dissenting voices on college campuses as necessary.
Necessary for what?
To maintain the status quo, to prevent things from changing too much.
Even if it means silencing people and going against ideas of free speech.
That seems to be the argument.
That's pretty disturbing.
It is. And the article even makes a comparison between what's happening now and McCarthyism back in the 1950s.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, they draw a direct parallel.
Can you remind me about McCarthyism?
Basically, it was this period where accusations of being communist were used to silence people all over America.
Like a witch hunt.
Kinda, yeah. And universities were definitely targeted.
So what happened?
People were blacklisted, couldn't get jobs.
Wow.
They were forced to sign loyalty oaths. They were fired, even imprisoned in some cases.
Just for being suspected of being communist?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's crazy.
It's a dark time. And eventually, McCarthyism lost its grip on the country. It was widely discredited as unjust and excessive.
So what's the connection to what's happening now?
The article suggests that this current wave of repression, while it might have an impact in the short term, could ultimately fail.
You mean like people will eventually see through it?
That's the hope.
Yeah.
They argue that you can't just erase ideas of justice and liberation.
That makes sense. People are always going to fight for what they believe in.
Exactly. And so the question becomes, as the article puts it, how far will this new McCarthyism go?
And will people stand up and fight back?
That's the key question.
So to sum it all up, the article argues that what's happening at Columbia University isn't just a bunch of isolated incidents. It's a coordinated effort to control what people think and believe in American higher education.
And they argue that the fight against anti-Semitism is being used as a tool to achieve this control.
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
It really is. It makes you wonder about the future of academic freedom in this country.
And what will it take for people to really push back against this?
That's the question we're left with.
Yeah.
It's a question of how much we value freedom of thought and the diversity of ideas, especially in places like universities.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been eye-opening to say the least.
You got it. It's definitely a lot to process.
For sure. And for all of you listening, thanks for tuning in.
See you next time.
Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on and stay curious.